Bind us together, the bells have played. Very appropriate as we look to this story about the descendants of Isaac, reading from the first book of the Scriptures, the book of Genesis. These are the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and the wife Rebekah conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, "If this is the way it is to be, well, why do I live?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger." When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy mantle. So they named him Esau. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field and he was famished. Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, for I am famished." Therefore he was called Edom. Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." Esau said, "I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The psalm for the day was the 119th. The whole thing runs about 176 verses. I'm sure that you didn't memorize that one as a child. Chances are good that you may have noticed, however, reading through it all, that it seems repetitious. Its message, a simple message really, is repeated 167 different ways to make sure we get it. God's will is the way to go. God's will. As the psalm goes, instead of saying God's will, God's will, God's will, the words are God's law, decrees, statutes, commandments, ordinances, word, precepts, and promise. However it is expressed, it means the same thing. The reading for today begins with that verse that's so familiar. As Sheldon read, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." That pretty much takes care of the present and the future. A light to see where we're stepping now, and one to shine on the path as we move forward. I want to highlight another verse too, and that's the one that comes toward the end. It celebrates looking backward and forward. It says, "Your decrees are my heritage forever. They are the joy of my heart." God's will is the good heritage to which we hold, the path on which we walk, in short, the way to go. Heritage is of deep significance to the people of God. The church that I served in Vermont is celebrating its bicentennial beginning today. Its heritage is very important. Churches look back and look at what they've done through the years and what their predecessors did and what the founders did. But you always have to look forward, too, to what's yet to come. So whether we get caught up in the present moment, whether that moment is made up of anxiety or joy, we never want to overlook the family's lifeblood or bloodline, the heritage, our connection, shared with all of those who subscribe to the covenants old and new. So we look to the first book of the Bible this morning, And we see how this old and I think kind of quirky story of these twins contributes to our understanding of the lamp, the light, the heritage of God's word. So as the story begins, we could let the light be that of the stars that shine in the dome overhead. Isaac is sharing this house with Rebekah, his wife, after 20 years of marriage, no children. And this was troubling because, as you remember, God made a promise to Isaac's father, Abram, that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky. This night, as Isaac looks into the shining canopy overhead, he's moved to pray his doubts and fears and perhaps his confusion. Or as a man who knew God's ways and honored God's will, it's more likely he simply prayed one of those Post-it notes to God, just reminding God of little things like, Rebekah is barren. Isaac prayed, the Lord answered, Rebekah conceived. Well, that was easy. But the pregnancy was not as easy as answered prayer. One morning, as the sun shone brightly overhead, Rebekah felt this violent kick inside her. Not one of those cute little thumps that brings invitations like, oh, it moved. Do you want to feel the baby? No, this thump hurt. So much so that she involuntarily cries, oh! And then it happened again and again. And as the night brought rest to Isaac, Rebekah is standing in the doorway of her house, watching the clouds drift by the face of the bright moon. She's having trouble sleeping because the life inside her has no sense of night or day, sunshine or moonlight. And Rebekah's womb is filled with jostling and struggling and pushing. She kept asking herself, why is this happening to me? What's wrong? So one day, she makes her way to the sanctuary of the Lord. In the light of an oil lamp, she stood, as best she could, and she prayed the same question she'd been asking herself, what's happening inside me? As God had answered Isaac, so now God answers Rebekah. How the answer came, we don't know. A voice, a feeling, I'm not sure. But in the literature of the Old Testament, this is called a poetic oracle. A poetic oracle, a message from God that has more to do with theology than with obstetrics. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. One shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. There's no more than that, at least not recorded. There's no explanation, there's no justification for it, no more than the announcement. Odd. She had sought the light of understanding, but had received instead a puzzling oracle that cast a dark shadow on what she and Isaac had considered a wonderful gift from this God of grace and love. Here are twins, conceived and called, but already in contention and conflict even before their birth. The delivery was as problematic and difficult as the pregnancy, with the second-born child grasping the heel of the first, as if trying to pull his brother back so he himself could be born. Now, reading all of this in its original Hebrew, which Reverend Pat is far better able to do than I, those Hebrew books in seminary were so heavy. Here's what all these little side mentions mean as we read the scriptures. There's a couple of parenthetical phrases. The birth announcement here is made up of wordplay in the Hebrew, of puns, and even some taunting, ridicule. The one named Esau is described as red and hairy, as if scripted to be the rough, sunburned outdoors man and hunter. But the narrator who's telling this story knows full well that the word red is a play on the word Edom, E-D-O-M. And the word for hair is a play on the name of the region where the Edomites settled. The word for hairy is Seir, and the place name is Seir. I'm sure the Hebrews got a big kick out of that. And the red complexion is linked later in the story to that blood-red stew. And the word for Jacob is just like the word for heel. And it has to do with his kicking his way out. And all of this is very clever in the Hebrew. A way for Jacob's nation to read all of this and look back and make fun of their rivals, the Edomites. And the one who was to be first in line for every blessing, twice the inheritance, these descendants of Esau, the one born first, the one who might have been the founder of a mighty nation with lots and lots of descendants. But no. Esau and Edom were to come in second because of two things. One was the inscrutable power of God, whose will would be done as the oracle had said it, and the self-serving cleverness of a conniving Jacob who knew what he wanted and found a way to get it, the heel. But we're getting a little ahead of the story. First, the boys have to grow up, and they do. Esau becomes a skilled hunter, a man of the open country. He'd be going to Gander Mountain a lot if it were still open. No parent should play favorites, but Isaac loved Esau and his rough ways and the wild game that's found its way to the cooking fire and the dinner table. Jacob, on the other hand, became the quiet man who liked the security of the tent. We can imagine him maybe more smooth-faced, a gentle man, interested far more in cooking the game than in catching it. And he was Rebekah's favorite. Jacob have I loved. I wonder if she, like Jesus' mother, ever pondered all these things in her heart, considering especially the meaning of the oracle as her boys grew up and grew more and more apart. Sibling rivalry, to be sure. The one stronger, the one shall be stronger than the other. Well, that's Esau, she thought to herself. But the elder shall serve the younger? Not likely, not the way things are going. But one day, the way things were going changed for good. That was the day Jacob's stew was worth more to Esau than his own birthright. The stage is nearly empty of details. We have a fire, we have a pot, we have the boiling stew, the cook stirring the porridge, and we have an exhausted hunter coming in from the field, smelling the rich aroma of the cooking pot and the stew. His stomach is empty, the pot is full. I'm starving, he announces as he approaches, and he's none too polite as he demands a bowl of Jacob's stew. The storyteller again mentions the color red, as if taunting again the Edomites. Jacob senses that this may be his chance. How long he's waited for this day, we don't know, whether he's plotted it or whether he's just seeing or seizing the opportunity. We don't know. But almost awkwardly, Jacob springs his own demand and says, "You want my stew? I want your birthright. How hungry are you?" Callously, Esau exclaims, "Look, I'm about to die of hunger. What do I need a birthright for? It's yours." Jacob is clever. He wants to seal the deal officially and legally. "Swear to it," he says. If this had been a light moment between casual swaggering older brother and his younger sibling with soup to share, it is darker now, with the oracle becoming clear. Double inheritance being given up, privilege, land, prosperity, security. The storyteller knows that from this point on, the Edomites are destined to no more than pottage. The essence of Esau's story from now on is in the verbs. Esau ate, got up, left, and despised his birthright. The storyteller knows that from this point on, through the younger brother Jacob, who puts more stock, not in the soup this time, but in the future, Israel will become the inheritor of all the good gifts of the Father, the nation of God's grace and will. Well, so this is part of the story of our heritage, you see. The heritage that we enjoy as people of God's grace. So let God's light shine on a couple of lessons, because that's why these stories are here. They're not just for entertainment purposes, but to learn something from them. So maybe if there is a lamp to our feet in this moment, consider how many of us give ourselves up for any old stew. Esau traded his birthright for porridge, lest we consider ourselves any more bright or patient or thoughtful than Esau. It would be good for us to admit that the things of the present moment, whatever our hungers or whatever our wants, can lead us to compromise our faith in God's promises. The Apostle Paul could make a long list of the things that human nature devises to draw us away from the life of the Spirit. For some brothers and sisters, as I mentioned last week, there are addictions that satisfy deep hungers and build barriers against the grace and freedom found in God's light. Drugs, yes, and alcohol, sex, food, work, sometimes even religion. Our emptiness finds relief in wrong-headed decisions that seem to work for the moment, but cloud the future and deny God's narrow way to an abundant life. I remember many years ago a friend who enjoyed a so-called recreational drug. He said lighting up a joint or two after coming home from a stressful day at the office was cheaper, actually, than therapy. His rather long-winded justification for his habit didn't include any reference to how his drug of choice found its way to his car every Saturday afternoon downtown. He didn't have a clue that his modest participation in stress reduction had any link to the city's crime rate or to the deaths of so many young black men in the neighborhoods and alleys of the city, in the shadows of these high-rise, high-rent office and apartment buildings. So easily we sell our heritage of faith by selling it out for momentary pleasures, a little small theft from the office that nobody will notice, keeping still when somebody else is being debased or verbally abused or bullied. And when I typed that line, a memory hit me, a confession to be made. I once walked into the shop of a church member who had promised a nice discount for some equipment we needed for youth ministry. As I walked in the front door, I heard angry words, and I saw him physically strike an employee. They were both embarrassed that I witnessed it. And after the victim had left, hurriedly, his boss rationalized the violent act as if he had had to discipline a misbehaving child. This is not something they taught us in seminary. This is decades ago. I was new to the ministry, shocked at what I was seeing, that angry outburst, clueless about what I should do about it. I should have done something because all these years later, the image stays with me. I would hope that I've grown a spine, with a lamp having shined on my path more brightly since then, and my heritage of conscience and compassion so much more clear, and all of us knowing far more about bullying and about abuse than we did then, or admitted then. Living for the moment, most of us don't give much thought to the decisions we make, but if saying yes to any temptation, or turning away from opportunities to do a good thing, means saying no to the God who's ordained such grace and love for us, even in our struggles, especially in our struggles, then we're no better, we're no wiser than Esau. We trade our spiritual birthright of life in the Spirit for pottage. But here's the good news, because there's always good news. The good news that shines a light on our path. Paul writes to the Romans, you live not by your natural inclinations, but by the Spirit of God, who's made a home in you. There's the power to say yes to God and to respond by walking in the light of God's grace. There's a second learning that comes in. The scandalous oracle about the elder serving the younger turned things upside down even in Genesis, but that inversion continues theologically through the whole of the Scriptures. It affirms that we're not fated to the way the world orders itself. Conventional wisdom falls to the wisdom of God, who keeps saying, the last shall be first, the first shall be last. The younger ones in the Bible keep finding themselves at the head of the line. little children leading, but other little ones too. Because when the Bible talks about the little ones, it's talking about the humble ones, the widows and the orphans, the sojourners, the publicans, the sinners. God tampers through Rebekah's oracle and through the ministry of Jesus to work God's will in the face of every human convention and every definition of propriety. Things are not always as they seem, but they are always the way God intends them to be. So much does God love the last in line, the littlest ones, that God descended to their level, to the level not of the victors, but of the victims. God so loved the world that God became a victim of humanity's cruelty. God is born in human form in a humble stable. Thus the references to Christmas earlier in the service. Jesus begins his public ministry joining in the ranks of sinners who were baptized by John in that dirty old water. In Jesus, God ministers not as a temple leader surrounded by the learned and the powerful and the holy rabbis, but as an itinerant preacher and healer who has no place to lay his head, surrounded by bumbling, if well-meaning, amateur disciples. And God descends more deeply into our humanity by moving among the sick and the sinner, by touching the untouchable and loving the unlovable. And God descends more deeply until Jesus, betrayed and forsaken, is condemned as a criminal and dies on a cross. God descends to the lowest of human depths. And then comes that great reversal again, the inversion, which theologically is seen in the Easter message, the glorious message of victory and hope and promises fulfilled from the very beginning, casting new light on every path, making for us a heritage of joy and salvation that brings us here where we gather for worship each little Easter Sunday. So here's our birthright. Let us not despise it or lay it aside for trivial stews. Let us honor it, live into its promise, rededicate ourselves to serving the Lord who's gifted us with that heritage. And that service means our descending too, you see, to love the little ones, offering to feed even during the summer, and to clothe and to build and to comfort them with no strings attached, not taking away their birthright, but announcing it all as good news, a lamp to their feet, a light to their path, a heritage of joy to celebrate. In other words, God's will, the way to go. Thanks be to God.